Mae, what are your differences? I'm expanding the scope here. What are your differences with Governor Kitzhaber, the now Governor Kitzhaber? But what are your differences with him?
Well, one thing he, isn't going along with the death penalty, and I know
Sorry.
that.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, the death penalty.
Yeah. So Governor Kitzhaber doesn't go along with the death penalty, and I think it's something that we should be doing. It's kind of sad for anybody to have to be put to death, but some people who are murderers, I mean, it's you pretty much going to need to start doing that, I think, just so that people will take it more seriously, and the taxpayers kind of resent having to pay for all the care for these people that are have murdered ruthlessly, and certainly there's probably some people who have murdered that maybe the situation was such that it is a little more forgivable, and to where they could just serve time, but I think that we need to do that. So that would be a difference. And then definitely a big difference is, of course, the Cover Oregon, and I guess they've decided to scrap that in favor of going with the federal exchange. But I don't even like the federal exchange. I think Obamacare is, it violates our religious rights for one, and it really isn't constitutional. In spite of the fact that the Supreme Court said that it is, it really isn't. The situation on that, they said, well, it's constitutional because it's a tax, but yet Obamacare originated in the Senate, I believe, and it's only the House that is allowed to originate tax bills, and so in that sense it really isn't constitutional, and it does violate religious freedoms. And so I think if I was to get in there as a governor, I would want to come up with some way to protect the citizens from having to pay the fines that they say they're going to have to pay if they don't sign up. I think it would be good if we could fight this as a state. If you have to fight it as an individual, it's kind of difficult because the government, the taxes, the fees that they're going to charge if you don't sign up are supposed to increase every year, and maybe before you know it, you'll be out of your house or something, and that's just not right. So I think that really it's important right now that the states start protecting their citizens, because the federal government is failing to do their job. It's really, the federal government, it's really their job to protect us from foreign and domestic invasion. And what we're seeing is that they have put us in this great debt, and I believe it was needless. I believe it was intentional. I think it's an intentional way to get more control over the citizens and for us to start to lose our freedoms. I think it's intentionally done. And so the federal government is failing to protect our constitutional rights, protect our freedoms. Again, by putting us into this debt, that they put us into, $17 trillion. It's really, I think, hurt our security as a nation severely. And I think that the states have to quit looking for the federal government to do something about it, because if they were going to do something about it, they would have done it by now. And I know we have, some people trying to get in the Senate, and there's good people trying to change this. But it's very difficult for those good people to get in, because the system is such that it more or less controls the voters. And so the voters need to quit being controlled. They need to think for themselves. They need to look at the issues. They need to look, read their voters' pamphlets and say, hey, what do I believe? Because if we keep going with basically what we're told, only these people can win, I believe America America can't win. America's going to lose. If we don't stand on principle and stand on values, it's all over. And I think the states can make a big difference if we can, get people into the state offices who really seriously will take it very serious, in protecting the citizens' constitutional rights. Our property rights, we almost don't have private property ownership anymore because the regulations have all but stolen our private property. It's way, way overregulated. And that would be a big, big thing for me. I would want to do everything I could possibly do to immediately deregulate private property. And then we need to look at the public use on public property. We should be doing more logging, and we should be able to use that land more than we are being allowed to use it. And I think the state just needs to push its weight and to basically insist that the people have more liberties on their own property and on the public property.
Very well. You covered a lot of range. That's great. I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to run for governor? What happened, or what was it that just said, I'm going to run for governor of a state of Oregon?
Yeah. To be perfectly honest, I would never have thought myself to run even for dog catcher, let alone governor. And so, for me to run for governor is kind of a big deal in a way, but I'm trying not to think a whole lot about it or make it into a big deal. And so, but there was a couple things that happened. It was probably 5-6 years ago. I woke up one morning, I had all these ideas, and I was really concerned about this money that we're in debt for, and I had some ideas of what I thought the states could do that would help, with the federal government. Of course, one simple thing is if the states, became more independent and quit taking money from the federal government. That would be one thing. And then there's some other things. But so I woke up with that, and then I thought, well, I told my husband, because my husband had run for county commissioner. So I told him, hey, Jim, you should run, for governor. Here's some stuff you could do. And I woke up with these ideas. I told Jim, well, here's what you could do, Jim. And so Jim says, well, they're your ideas. Why don't you run? I can't run for governor. and so then a few years later, maybe a couple years later, Dennis Richardson was at a meeting because he was running for state rep. And at that time, Dennis was being big on trying to encourage Chinese to be taught in the schools. And, there's nothing wrong with learning a second language. That's fine. But when you want to push it, to the degree that he seemed to want to push it, to me, it almost seems, it just almost seems not quite right. And so at that meeting, I got a bucket full of guts, and I walked up to him and I said, well, what is this, Dennis? Is this kind of like, you want our children to learn, Chinese? Is this kind of like surrender? And I said, when I went to school, I remember being taught that, when a nation surrenders to another, that the people have to learn the other's language. And that's what I was taught. And I asked Dennis that, and he says, well, no, it's just good for them to learn it. And that was his response. But anyway, so then when I found out through a letter that was written by Dennis that he is encouraging Chinese factories into Oregon, that's what really made me say, well, somebody has to run against Dennis that's going to point this out, because this isn't right. And I know some people might think, well, if you look at it this way, if you say, okay, well, we buy everything over there anyway, so if we had the factories here, wouldn't that be better? I don't really see it that way. I mean, it's still a Chinese factory. And the second thing is, it's not that I'm prejudice, but the point is all those big Chinese factories, they're going to be owned by the communist government. Now, part of a definition of a communist country is that government owns and operates business. And so when we have Chinese government-owned businesses coming in here, then clearly we are becoming communists. I mean, we're already kind of down that road to a certain extent. And, of course, people say, well, we owe them so much anyway, But there's ways out of it. I know that there are. There's other ways to deal with this besides continuing to sell our states out and our country out. You know, this is just a continuation of a progressive communism, I would call it, actually, because when we had, you know, George Bush, he did the little bank bailouts, and then along comes Obama with his bigger bank bailouts, and then the big stimulus package. Okay, so now that some of the states are going, oh, well, now we're so broke, we need foreign investment, and I don't really call it foreign investment, I call it a sellout. And yeah, investment if it's really just an investment, like if you're just, you know, putting some investment into a stock market, I don't know, but when you got Chinese factories being encouraged to come in that are owned by the communist government, that's not a good thing. And according to the New American, that big pork company that was purchased in Virginia, Smithfield, was purchased by the Chinese. That is actually now owned by the Communist political party now, and that's what I understand, according to the New American. So this has got to stop. We got to quit selling ourselves out.
Well, you know, get that full gamut in there. Keep looking at me for it. Don't worry. Even though my eyes keep looking at the camera, just making sure the shots. But keep looking at me for it.
Yeah, I guess I've been looking at the camera
it's
too
okay.
much.
Been going back and
Sorry.
forth. No, it's good. You're wanting to talk to the voter. Did I bring? Oh, I thought I had me. I wanted to make sure I was on track here. Well, that's interesting. So about just going back to where you wanted to run for governor. So is that your only beef, basically, I guess, with Representative Richardson, I guess, at this time? I mean, what is your differences between you and Richardson, other than now you've identified the China business kind of thing and the communist thing? Are there any other differences that you have?
Well, that's going to be the big difference. You know, I've heard he's a little bit, you know, probably a little wishy-washy on the gay marriage thing, or, you know, which, you know, I believe that that's wrong. You know, I believe it's a sin, and so I believe it's wrong for the state to sanction any kind of a sin. I think that's wrong. I mean, if, you know, if a couple of guys, they want to live together, I mean, that's kind of their business. But for them to ask the state to sanction it and make it, you know, okay or whatever, it's just not right.
Yeah.
So,
So that's okay. So with Richardson, that's the main thing, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's
else?
the main thing.
Okay.
I think he's, you know, on the schools, he seems like he's kind of maybe almost thinking maybe we need more funding in the schools. I'm kind of thinking we just need to change the type of actually education that the teachers get, for one. Because I know a lot of the teachers are required to take, I'm just going to call them psychosocial engineering classes, where they're taught how to, you know, deal with the children and psychologically deal with them or whatever. And of course, the Common Core is a bad situation. I'm not sure where Dennis even stands on that. I guess I should know, but the thing that I focused on was this business of him wanting to encourage the Chinese factories. And, you know, I think at one time Dennis was, you know, not a half bad representative, but I think somehow he's gotten off on the wrong track. And so I would personally not want him as a governor because of his stands basically on the, you know, encouraging the Chinese factories in. I'm very opposed to that.
What about Gordon Chalstrom? He's from Medford here. Any differences you have with him?
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and say that I think personally, I do think that there's actually only 3 Republicans in this race. I mean, in spite of the fact that all 6 of us are registered Republican, I think there's only 3 of us that really represent Republican values, and that would be myself, Gordon Chalstrom, and Bruce Cuff. And I think that we are the ones that are more closely stand by the Republican Party platform. And now between me and Charlstrom, Charlstrom, he likes to talk a lot about, we need jobs and we gotta, do what we can to get jobs, and yeah, we do need jobs. I won't deny that. But to me, the most immediate thing that we need is deregulation. And I think that we need our freedom back. And I think that if we have more freedom, if we can deregulate, I think that will naturally bring us up in the amount of jobs that we will have. And so I think that's like really the key, to me. And, Gordon hasn't been talking too much about reducing taxes, but occasionally he'll say, he wants to reduce them by quite a bit all at once, sort of a thing. And to me, I'm thinking that the way to handle it is maybe just like reduce the income tax, maybe 5% or something. But then again, that deregulation, very, very important. And the funny thing is all of your Republican candidates will talk about deregulation. They all will. But you just don't see it happening. And so I'm very serious about it. I would want it to happen, and I would want it to happen quick, because I really think it's important to get our economy going. I think it's very important, and that will give us jobs. And not only that, but we'll be a little happier because we'll be a little freer. And I think people are too regulated on their private property. And, another thing I could mention is, I know, comparing me to the other candidates, Bruce Cuff, he's been talking about wanting to get away from property taxes. And instead of doing the property taxes, he would like to have a sales tax, but not a state sales tax, actually local sales tax. And so the counties, each county would have their own sales tax, and it could be a different amount in each county according to what the county wanted. And so he thinks this is a good idea because it would help decentralize the power by, putting the taxes with the counties. And I'm not really totally opposed to that idea. It's not a bad idea, actually. Generally, it's not a bad idea. And I do like the idea of not having property taxes because, you've already paid for your property, and it would be nice just to say, well, I've paid for my property, and I don't have to pay for it every year. So in a way, it's not a bad idea, but I think that's pretty much up to the voters to decide that, because there are several home rule counties in Oregon, and I think there's maybe at least 11 of us. Josephine County is a home rule charter county. We go by a charter, and I believe that charter then would require the citizens to vote and agree that they would rather opt for sales tax instead of doing the property tax and whatnot. But I don't know. If we went to sales tax, it almost might be better to have it be a state sales tax, just because that way the counties wouldn't be competing with each other. You have one county that's got higher tax and another one that's lower, and then plus when you have little towns, a lot of people are, if you have a little town that's next to a big town that's in a different county, then a lot of people might go to the big town to shop, and so they're getting all the tax money, and the little town's not bringing in the money. I don't know. It might be better if it was a state thing, and then kind of split up a portion by population or something.
Very well. How do you expect to win the primaries? How are you campaigning yourself, and how do you expect to win?
The main thing, that we did was pay the $3,000 for the voters pamphlet. And, I have gotten some people that have called me and said that they really love my message. And so, so that's a big deal. And, I've been going out and talking a little bit. And the object here is not so much to win as it is to stand up for my beliefs and hopefully encourage other people to do the same, because if we don't, we're losing our country. And it's very, very important that we start standing up for what we believe.
Who is Mae Rafferty? What's the phrase or something that you think distinguishes you from the others?
Well, One, I'm opposed to the, New World Order and the global economy, and I'm not saying everybody else, wants it. And, the global economy, I'm not saying that you can't, import stuff and do business with other countries, but I'm very strongly of the belief that we need to beef our manufacturing up, because we're in a weak position, and, and I think that's very, very important, and I don't really, hear the other candidates talking so much about, that we need to beef our own manufacturing up. But that's a very important thing for me, and bringing a Chinese factory here, and I don't really call that us beefing our manufacturing up. We need to do it ourselves. Our own people need to do it. We need to, loosen regulations up and do whatever we can to help our own people with that.
With Richardson, you identified not only the Chinese businesses, but also a social issue, which will be on the ballot, the same-sex marriage thing. And
yeah, well, I don't know that he's really, I didn't mean to make it sound like he's for it. I don't know that he's really for it, but he's a little bit wishy-washy on it. He isn't really, doesn't seem to take a stand one way or the other. He's just...
And you have definitely, from now I have seen like the Oregonian when they spoke to you.
Yeah, the Oregonian, they kind of, somehow there's some stuff that kind of got bent a little bit. It's not quite the way it was said, because basically they're saying that I said that, that same-sex marriage would be the same as murder, and that's not what I said. I said, as murder is a sin, same-sex marriage is a sin. And so, I could have used theft, theft is a sin, same-sex marriage is a sin. So it's a sin, and I'm not saying that they're equal or that they're worse, or, that's up to God to decide. I don't really make that kind of judgment, and I'm not the judge anyway. So, it's just that, I know that it's a sin.
Very well. And is that how, I guess, with the social issues, is that with the same-sex marriage that'll be on the ballot, how will, when you go into such a divisive, it's a issue that people choose one way or the other. How will you reach voters who, don't see, I guess, eye to eye with what you feel with social issues or anything else? I guess, how will you reach those in Portland and Eugene,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, they're not all like that. There's some people up there that don't go along with, what's going on. As far as reaching them, I don't know. It might just be up to God. I don't know if I can do it. I would like to think that they would kind of look at other issues instead of just that, is what I'd like to think. Logically, that's what they need to be doing. They need to be looking at the other issues, because, our country's, it's in a bad situation, and we're just going to have to start looking at the real important issues. I'm not saying that has no importance, but it isn't the most important issue to the survival of our country. There's many issues that are very, very important to the survival of our country, and basically we got to quit, putting our own people down. We got to quit suppressing our people. Our people are very suppressed with regulation, and that's largely, I think, why we have, the problems that we're having, with our economy and not being able to use our natural resources. Real wealth comes from the land. And so, if we're not allowed to use the land, we're going to be poor. It's that simple. It's
yeah. 3 candidates are from Southern Oregon, for the primaries. As far as I know, I think Bruce Keck is a little bit, is he central?
Yeah, he's close to Salem.
Salem.
Yeah,
and
Mahama, close to Salem.
And Tim Carr's up there, kind of, right?
Yeah, Tim's from Portland, and then Darren's near Portland.
Darren, who's Darren?
I don't know about there's a sixth candidate, Darren Carr, and he didn't put his name in the voter pamphlet. He's a young man, and he's a little bit, he's the youngest of us, and he's a little more liberal, I would say, and in his thinking, and so I didn't include him as being among the 3 Republicans.
Uh-huh.
I think there's, like I said, I think there's 3 Republicans, and those are the 3 that more closely hold to the party's platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Darren, where is Darren up north as well, or?
Yeah, Darren's near Portland somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very nice guy though, very very nice.
Cool.
Yeah, he's just some of his issues are he just varies a little bit from the platform, but he's
Okay.
yeah. Actually, all the candidates have treated me really nice that I've gotten to meet him. They've all been nice guys.
Civil, good.
Yeah.
Well, I guess kind of just wrapping things up. You know, we identified some of those candidates who are north of here, and we have the 3 who are down from here, from Southern Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think folks here will, know what we represent, the things we care about. Do you think you, as a candidate, will convince those up north what we care about, and representing the whole state? I guess because I've heard that Multnomah County is like, the county you have to try to win.
Yeah, I know.
Eventually.
Yeah, it is. It's a difficult question for me. I did get up there myself, and I walked around and passed out a few flyers, and I did, run into 3 young gentlemen that were, seemed to be kind of behind me, because I did tell them I do favor the Second Amendment rights, and I believe that we should have a state militia. And those 3 young men, they said, well, we want to join up, and I was so impressed with them. It just really touched my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very well. Is there anything else that I've missed that you'd like to add about your campaign and about being I'm calling this piece Rogue Candidates, Rogue Valley or Rogue, but I mean, you're in Grants Pass, but Southern Oregon, candidates. Anything else you'd like to add?
I want to add? I think I would just add that I really believe, the way our country's going, that it's the states that are going to have to carry this nation. I think the states are going to have to stand up and be strong. They need to assess their, not assess, but they need to assert their Second Amendment right,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is a big amendment for the states, which gives the states the authority to make many decisions that the federal government is not supposed to be making unless it is, stated in the Constitution. And so I think that the states need to assert that 10th Amendment, and I think it's very important that the states start to realize that we need to become independently strong. We need to, the states need to be out of debt. The states need to say, no, we don't need any of your federal money. On the average, I think the states are taking about 30% of all the states' funding is coming from the federal pocketbook. And where does that come from? Well, yeah, some of it comes from us, and some of it comes from all these loans. And we can't keep going into debt. We're just selling our country out. We've got to quit that. It's very, very important. And for the states to be strong, the citizens need to be unoppressed. And I think we've become very, very oppressed. As a business person, I see, the regulations make it difficult to expand, difficult to do things that you would otherwise do. We would see a boom, I think, if that heavy hand would just get lifted off of us and we didn't have so much regulation. And that's a very big thing for me, and I think it would help tremendously. So on the tax issue, I know Charlstrom has talked about, wanting to bring the taxes down quite a bit, which I'm not opposed to that, but I'm thinking that it should be done a little bit more slowly, because I'm thinking if we reduced regulation quickly, very, very quickly, and of course, we're going to have to battle the legislative body on that one, but if we did that very quickly, I think that would bring us quite a bit more jobs. But if I'm thinking, we can't necessarily, maybe not really afford to reduce the taxes all at once real quick, because there are a lot of people on welfare. And I'm not saying that they deserve to be or that they should be, but we need to, lift the hand of regulation, and that would help with more jobs. And so we need to get those more jobs coming first, I think. But I wouldn't be opposed to maybe say drop the income tax by 5% right away and then deregulate right away. And then as the jobs start to come up and some of these unemployed people, start getting back to where they're able to work and they're not needing the assistance, then we can, maybe continue to drop the income tax a little bit more over time. So that's kind of what I'm thinking would be the better approach. But I am a woman, and it is a woman's prerogative to change her mind.
How do you support her?
We decided some time ago that the message had to go out. And whether it was going to go out through another candidate or go out through her, no one else was singing the song, so she decided to do it. And with my help, I decided, yes, let's go ahead and do this. It's going to be expensive, but we'll do it anyway because Oregon's worth it. And also, she's setting an example. We get customers in the store all the time now that's really impressed with what she's doing and thinking, well, hey, I can maybe do something. And people have been talking about getting more involved because of her involvement. So
very well.
It's a testimonial, It's just, like they said, a pauper could become president. Well, Rurange could become governor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, must be interesting as the primaries roll forth. I mean, what are you ready and willing to make changes? If
absolutely. We talked about. You may not want to print this, but we talked about moving the southern, the capital to Southern Oregon to Selma. Just as a southern capital site.
I have got them mixed up actually. I said, yeah, she lives in Salem. I mean Selma. Big difference.
big difference. Yeah, by about 300,000 people.
Right. Right.
So we take it a step at a time, and we always try to do what's right. And sometimes we make the wrong decision, like in the store. Sometimes we make a wrong decision, but we always deal with our customers equally. We don't deal with them, because you're so and so, we'll give you a special deal. Or if you're not so good, we think we're not going to give you a bad deal. It'll be the same deal. And she's going to do the same thing with the government. It's what you see is what you get. So.
Yeah, a lot of people kept saying, "Well, why are you running? Why didn't Jim run?" Really, if I was to get in there, you'd almost have two governors, because Jim, I don't know, he's got a lot of strong points, and he kind of keeps me on the straight and narrow path.
Doesn't take much to do that, because she has high moral standards.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice that she's also somewhat flamboyant.
Flamboyant?
Well, she's kind of.
I don't know what me? I don't know about that.
Well, anyway, very responsive, I guess, and quick on the. Someone came up to her and said something about you're ruffling the Republican feathers, and she says, "Well, how many?" Things like that. I mean, she's always coming up with these different things, so it's really great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you gotta ruffle some feathers when you're running. I mean, you gotta be decisive on issues, and we've been able to talk and figure out where those probably ruffles of feathers are.
And that's and she's been doing that. I mean, she's it's not like she has to try to convince somebody to vote for her as much as getting the message out. Now, if she's getting the message out and people like the message and they vote for her anyway, well, that's perfect. The state could use somebody like this. So.
Very well. Anything else you both would like to add? It's neat to hear. I've spoken with either candidates and their spouses, and it's interesting to hear their perspective as they support, their spouse in running and things. And so, thank you for your insight.
Take
Jim.
Support, so.
Jim kept encouraging me. I kind of kept trying to get out of it, and he kept encouraging me.
Well, we're a little political around here. We're opposed to the property taxes that's coming up, and we're opposed to a number of things. And we do support some candidates. In fact, I got to the point where I even have a political action committee. So it's called Work for a Constitutional Government. So it's just one of those things that just kind of come down the line, you know, as things happen, you just it does what it does. I mean, you step up to the plate. In other words, you have to do something, and you don't know what to do, so you do it anyway, and that's what Lorraine has been doing. Mae.
Lorraine to you, Mae to everyone else. It looks
Yeah.
like right now. For now.
Well, when I ran my campaign, I was Jim to everybody, but on the campaign trail, I was James.
I see.
You know, so.